"We have no room." My mother-in-law said it without hesitation. Not a trace of sympathy. Not even surprise. Just 3 cold words delivered through the narrow opening of a front door, while my 3 children stood beside me holding duffel bags that contained almost everything we still owned. For a moment, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. The late afternoon sun was shining directly into my eyes. I was exhausted from 6 hours of driving. My youngest son was leaning against my leg, half asleep. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe grief was making everything sound harsher than it really was. Then my father-in-law stepped forward. He looked at me, looked at our suitcases, looked at his grandchildren, and slowly pulled the door toward himself. The movement was calm, deliberate, as if he were closing a sales office after business hours, not turning away family, not turning away 3 children who had buried their father less than a month earlier. The door moved inch by inch. I felt something inside me break. Not anger. Not yet. Something deeper. The final realization that the people standing in front of me had never truly accepted us. Before the door fully closed, I leaned forward and whispered 3 words. "Check his will." My father-in-law froze, just for a second. Then the door clicked shut, and we were left standing on the porch. The 3 kids stared at me. Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than anything I had carried during the last 2 years, including my husband's coffin. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 40 years old. I've served in the United States Army for nearly 2 decades. Most of my career was spent in logistics and transportation units. I've worked through hurricanes, deployment schedules, supply shortages, and emergencies that would make most people panic. Military training teaches you how to function when everything falls apart. What it doesn't teach you is how to survive losing the person you love most. 3 weeks earlier, I had buried my husband, David. Cancer took him at 43. It wasn't quick. It wasn't peaceful. And it certainly wasn't fair. The disease arrived like an unwelcome guest and then refused to leave. For 2 years we fought. Every treatment, every specialist, every clinical trial we could afford. Then every treatment we couldn't afford. We refinanced the house, sold investments, emptied savings accounts. I cashed out retirement funds and accepted penalties I knew would hurt us later. Later never seemed important. Keeping David alive did. By the end, there was almost nothing left. The house was gone. The second vehicle was gone. Most of our savings were gone. The future we had carefully built together was gone. And then David was gone too. The kids took it hard. Emily was 16, old enough to understand everything, too young to carry that much grief. Jacob was 12. He tried acting strong because he thought that's what men were supposed to do. The effort broke my heart. Then there was little Noah, only 8 years old. He still expected his father to walk through the front door. Sometimes he would hear a truck outside and run to the window. Every time disappointment followed. The drive to Ohio had been my last option. David's parents owned a large home outside Columbus. 5 bedrooms. Plenty of space. They were financially comfortable. More than comfortable, actually. His father had owned several businesses. His mother had never worked outside the home. I wasn't expecting charity. I wasn't asking them to support us forever. I simply needed time. A few months. Enough time to stabilize our lives. Enough time to find permanent housing. Enough time for the children to recover from losing their father. Apparently that was too much to ask. "Mom," Emily's voice pulled me back to the present. "Are we leaving?" I swallowed hard. "Yes." "Where are we going?" I looked toward the SUV. Honestly, I didn't know. That was the terrifying part. Military life teaches planning. Contingencies. Backup plans. I usually had 3 solutions before a problem even arrived. But grief had destroyed my ability to think that way. I had focused entirely on getting us here. I genuinely believed David's parents would help. That assumption had been my mistake. "We'll figure it out," I said. The children nodded. Not because they believed me, because they wanted to. That hurt even more. An hour later, we checked into a roadside motel. The kind with faded carpeting and a blinking vacancy sign. The room smelled faintly of old air conditioning and cleaning chemicals. The kids settled onto the beds while I sat in a chair by the window. Outside headlights moved through the darkness. Inside exhaustion settled over me like a blanket. I kept replaying the moment at the front door. The expression on my father-in-law's face, especially after I whispered those 3 words, "Check his will." Why had he reacted that way? David had never discussed his will in detail. He only told me everything was handled. Typical David. Always trying to protect me from additional stress. My thoughts drifted backward. To the final week of his life. He was in hospice care. Weak. Thin. barely able to sit up, yet somehow still focused on everyone except himself. One afternoon he reached into a bedside drawer. "Sarah," he said softly. I sat beside him and took his hand. "What is it?" He handed me a sealed envelope. "Promise me something." My stomach tightened. "Okay. If things get difficult after I'm gone, open this." I looked at the envelope. "What's inside?" "You'll know when the time comes." I wanted answers. Instead, I nodded. Because that's what you do when someone you love is dying. You stop arguing about small things. You treasure every remaining minute. Back in the motel room, I suddenly remembered where I had placed the envelope. The bottom compartment of my travel bag. Untouched. Unopened. Waiting. Slowly I stood. My hands trembled as I pulled the envelope free. David's handwriting covered the front. Just my name. Sarah. Nothing else. The children were asleep now. The room was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the envelope for several seconds. Then I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter. And beneath the letter was something else. Something that immediately made my heart begin pounding. Because in that moment I realized my husband had been keeping a secret. A very big secret. One that was about to change everything. Jung tu fan tiep theo toi se hong hitieo je parto jiao chigio koi theo jung yo kao. I stared at the contents of the envelope for a long time before I could force myself to read. The letter rested in my lap. Beneath it was a business card. Not just any business card. It belonged to a probate attorney in Columbus. Someone I had never met. Across the bottom, David had written a note in blue ink. "Call him if Mom and Dad refuse to help." My pulse quickened. Even then, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about survival. 3 children were asleep 10 feet away from me. I had less than $12,000 left in my checking account. My military leave would eventually end. And somehow I needed to build an entirely new life. I unfolded the letter. The first words nearly broke me. "My beautiful Sarah, if you're reading this, then one of 2 things happened. Either my parents surprised me and proved me wrong, or they did exactly what I fear they will do." I stopped reading. Tears blurred the page. Even after all those months of illness, I still wasn't used to seeing David's handwriting. Every letter felt alive. Every sentence sounded like his voice. I wiped my eyes and continued. "My guess is that they turned you away. If that's what happened, I need you to understand something. You did nothing wrong. The children did nothing wrong. And I need you to know a truth I should have told you years ago." The next several pages revealed a side of my husband's life I had never fully understood. When I met David 20 years earlier, he rarely spoke about his childhood. He wasn't secretive, just private. Whenever conversations drifted toward family history, he would smile politely and change the subject. I always assumed there were painful memories involved. Now I was finally learning why. According to the letter, David's relationship with his parents had begun falling apart years before I entered the picture. His father owned several successful businesses, construction companies, equipment leasing, commercial properties. From the outside, they looked like a model American success story. Inside the family, things were very different. Control mattered more than love. Obedience mattered more than honesty. His father expected David to eventually run the family operations. That had been the plan since childhood. Then David discovered practices he believed were unethical. Nothing dramatic enough for television. No organized crime. No Hollywood-style scandals. Just the kind of shortcuts and manipulations that happen when money becomes more important than principles. David refused to participate. The argument lasted nearly a year. Eventually, he walked away. His father never forgave him. His mother sided with her husband, and the relationship was never truly repaired. I remembered all the holidays they skipped, the birthdays they missed, the excuses, the distance. Suddenly, everything made sense. The letter continued. "I never wanted you carrying this burden, Sarah. You already carried enough. But I need you to know that my parents value money more than they value relationships. They always have." I looked toward the sleeping children. Noah had rolled halfway off the bed. Jacob was snoring softly. Emily still had tear stains on her cheeks. I wondered how any grandparent could look at those faces and close a door. The answer sat in my hands, because they had spent a lifetime choosing pride over people. I continued reading. Then I reached the paragraph that changed everything. For years, David had quietly built investments. Small at first, then larger. Careful decisions. Long-term planning. Rental properties. Index funds. Private investments. Nothing flashy. Nothing risky. The portfolio had grown steadily. I felt my stomach tighten. I knew we had some investments. I had no idea how extensive they were. Apparently, neither did his parents. My parents believe I died nearly broke, David wrote. I allowed them to believe that. I blinked, then read the sentence again. The next paragraph explained why. During his illness, his parents occasionally asked questions about finances, not because they wanted to help, because they wanted information. David recognized it immediately, so he shared very little. The less they knew, the better. Then came another shock. He anticipated they might eventually attempt to challenge his estate. Apparently, his father had made comments over the years suggesting that family wealth should remain within the bloodline. The implication was obvious. I was an outsider. Always had been. Always would be. Even after 20 years of marriage. Even after raising their grandchildren. Even after nursing their son through cancer. The thought made me physically ill. Then I reached the final page. Everything has already been arranged. Attorney Michael Reynolds has instructions. Please trust him. Do not let anger guide your decisions. Truth is enough. Truth always wins eventually. I folded the letter and sat quietly. Outside rain had begun tapping against the motel window. I missed David more than words could describe. Not because of the money. Not because of whatever legal plans he had created. I missed him because even from beyond the grave he was still trying to protect us. The next morning I called the attorney. His receptionist transferred me immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, he said. I've been expecting your call. Those words sent a chill through me. You knew I'd call. Your husband believed there was a strong possibility. I glanced toward the children eating motel waffles in the lobby. What happens now? There was a pause. Then he answered carefully. I think we should meet. When? As soon as possible. By noon I was sitting across from him in a conference room. He looked to be in his 60s. Calm. Professional. The kind of man who inspired confidence without trying. He reviewed several documents. Then he looked directly at me. Your husband was exceptionally thorough. That sounded exactly like David. What does that mean? It means he planned for every scenario. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. What scenario are we talking about? The attorney leaned back. Primarily the possibility that his parents would attempt to assert influence over his estate. I stared at him. You mean inheritance? Among other things. The room suddenly felt smaller. What exactly did David leave behind? The attorney smiled faintly. I'm afraid I can't discuss specific numbers until the official reading. My heart started pounding. Official reading. The phrase sounded like something from an old movie. Then he added something even more surprising. There's already been contact from your in-laws. I froze. What kind of contact? They've requested an emergency family meeting. That made no sense. Less than 24 hours earlier, they had shut a door in our faces. Now they wanted a meeting. Why? The attorney opened a folder. Inside were several messages. Formal. Polite. Urgent. Something had changed. Or perhaps they knew something I didn't. Mrs. Mitchell, he said quietly, I strongly suggest you attend. I looked at the folder, then at the children waiting in the lobby beyond the glass wall. For the first time since David died, I felt something other than grief. Not hope. Not yet. But curiosity. And a growing suspicion that my husband had one final surprise waiting for everyone. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. The attorney's office occupied the 3rd floor of a brick building in downtown Columbus. It was the kind of place that projected quiet success. Polished wood, framed certificates, soft lighting. The sort of office where serious conversations happened. I arrived 30 minutes early. Military habits, Hart. The children stayed with a trusted friend of mine from the army who lived nearby. I didn't want them sitting through whatever was about to happen. I expected tension. I expected awkwardness. What I didn't expect was confidence. When my in-laws walked into the conference room, neither looked ashamed about what had happened at their front door. Neither apologized. Neither asked about the children. My mother-in-law wore an expensive navy suit. My father-in-law carried himself like a businessman attending a routine board meeting. If anything, they appeared irritated, as though my presence had complicated their day. The attorney greeted everyone politely and invited us to sit. My father-in-law folded his hands. Let's get this over with. I said nothing. Over the years, Army service had taught me the value of silence. People often reveal more when you simply let them talk. The attorney opened a thick file. I'll begin by confirming that this meeting concerns the estate of David Mitchell. My father-in-law nodded impatiently. Yes. The attorney continued. Several legal formalities followed. Then he finally reached the substance of the meeting. I noticed something interesting. The further he progressed, the more confident my in-laws became. They exchanged occasional glances. Tiny smiles, subtle expressions. The kind people make when they believe events are unfolding exactly as expected. I began to understand. They thought I was financially ruined. They thought David had died with little remaining. They thought whatever assets existed would be divided according to assumptions they had already made. The truth hadn't arrived yet. When it did, everything changed. The attorney cleared his throat. Before discussing distributions, I would like to summarize the estate. My father-in-law leaned back comfortably. The attorney reviewed several categories: life insurance, investment accounts, property interests, retirement assets, business holdings. I watched my father-in-law's expression slowly change. At first there was confidence, then confusion, then concentration, then disbelief. The numbers kept growing. Each category revealed another layer, another asset, another investment, another account. By the time the summary ended, complete silence filled the room. My mother-in-law blinked repeatedly. "That can't be correct." The attorney looked down at his paperwork. "It is correct." My father-in-law's face had gone pale. "I wasn't aware David owned those properties." "You were not listed as a beneficiary on those holdings," the attorney replied. The room felt very still. For years they had underestimated their own son. Now they were learning how badly. The attorney continued. Mr. Mitchell made extensive preparations prior to his passing. I almost smiled. That was David. Always prepared. Always thinking 3 moves ahead. Even cancer hadn't changed that. My father-in-law straightened in his chair. "So how is everything being divided?" The attorney opened another folder. This one appeared different from the others, more detailed, more personal. He began reading. "To my wife Sarah Mitchell, who stood beside me every day of my life." The words hit me like a wave. Suddenly I wasn't sitting in a conference room. I was back in a hospital room holding David's hand, listening to machines beep through another long night. The attorney continued. David described our marriage, our children, the sacrifices we had made together, the years of army relocations, the deployments, the financial struggles, the victories, the ordinary moments that truly build a life. I lowered my eyes. Some memories were too painful to revisit. Then the attorney reached the actual distributions. The vast majority of the estate went to me and our children. Not merely most, almost all of it. Every major asset, every significant account, every property interest, every long-term investment, everything. My mother-in-law interrupted. "Surely there must be some mistake." "There is no mistake." My father-in-law's jaw tightened. "What about family inheritance?" The attorney looked directly at him. Mr. Mitchell addressed that question specifically. For the first time, I noticed uncertainty in my father-in-law's eyes. The attorney turned a page. Then he read a statement David had personally written. If my parents are hearing this, they already know why certain decisions were made. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles over a room when everyone understands the meaning of words without needing further explanation. The attorney continued reading. David had documented years of interactions. Missed opportunities, broken promises, long absences. He didn't exaggerate. That wasn't his style. He simply listed facts, dates, conversations, emails, events, evidence. A lifetime of disappointment reduced to a clear record. I glanced at my mother-in-law. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. Not angry. Uncomfortable. As though she were hearing her own reflection described aloud. The attorney paused before reading the next section. Then he proceeded. To my mother and father I leave $1 each. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I honestly wondered if I had heard correctly. The attorney continued. The amount is intentional and serves as acknowledgement that you were considered in my estate planning. My father-in-law stared across the table. The color drained from his face. $1? The symbolic gesture carried enormous meaning. David wasn't excluding them by accident. He was excluding them deliberately. The distinction mattered. A lot. My mother-in-law whispered something I couldn't hear. The attorney remained professional. He simply continued reading. The room felt smaller with every passing minute. Years of assumptions were collapsing. Years of entitlement were evaporating. And the person dismantling them wasn't me. It wasn't an attorney. It wasn't a judge. It was David. Even after death. The meeting paused briefly. Water glasses were refilled. Documents were organized. Nobody said much. Then the attorney spoke again. There is one additional matter. My father-in-law looked exhausted. What now? The attorney folded his hands. Mr. Mitchell left instructions regarding a final document. I saw genuine concern flash across both of their faces. Not irritation? Not annoyance. Concern. The attorney continued. This document is separate from the will. My stomach tightened. I had never heard about any additional document. What kind of document? I asked. The attorney looked at me kindly. A personal statement. My father-in-law shifted in his chair. The movement was subtle but noticeable. The attorney opened yet another folder. Unlike the others, this one contained only a few pages. The paper itself looked different. Older. Perhaps prepared earlier. Mr. Mitchell requested that it be shared after the estate distributions were completed. The room became silent once again. Outside the conference room window, people walked along the sidewalk. Cars passed. Life continued normally. Inside that room, however, everything felt suspended. Waiting. The attorney placed the pages on the table. Then he looked directly at us. Particularly at David's parents. I believe you should hear this. My father-in-law swallowed. My mother-in-law stared at the document, and for the first time since arriving, neither of them appeared confident. They looked afraid. I had no idea what David had written, but judging by their reactions, they suspected exactly what was coming. And whatever it was, they clearly didn't want it read aloud. The attorney adjusted his glasses and looked down at the pages. Nobody spoke. I could hear the faint hum of the building's air conditioning system. Outside, a siren passed somewhere in the distance. Inside the conference room, every person seemed to be holding their breath. Then he began reading. To whoever is present today, if this letter is being read, then I am no longer here to speak for myself. The sound of David's words immediately changed the atmosphere. It felt as though he had entered the room. Not physically, but emotionally. His presence settled over all of us. The attorney continued. I do not write this letter out of anger. I write it because truth deserves a voice. My father-in-law lowered his eyes. My mother-in-law sat perfectly still. David went on to describe our life together. Not dramatic moments, not grand achievements. The ordinary things that matter most. The years we spent building a family. The military relocations. The late-night talks after the children were asleep. The holidays celebrated in small apartments and military housing. The birthdays. The graduations. The laughter. The setbacks. The kind of life millions of Americans live every day. A real life, a good life. Then he wrote about my role during his illness. I found myself gripping the edge of my chair. Sarah never left my side. Not once. She sold things she loved to keep me alive. She worked, cared for our children, attended appointments, and carried burdens no one should carry alone. My eyes filled with tears. I wasn't embarrassed. After everything that had happened, I no longer cared who saw me cry. The attorney continued. Many people called me brave during my illness. They were wrong. Sarah was the brave one. I looked away. For 2 years, I had simply done what needed to be done. When someone you love is dying, you don't think about bravery. You think about the next appointment, the next treatment, the next day. You survive 1 hour at a time. David understood that, apparently more than I realized. Then the tone of the letter shifted. Not harshly, not bitterly. Just honestly, my parents had many opportunities to be part of our lives. The attorney paused briefly before continuing. They were invited repeatedly. The door remained open. The phone calls were made. The holidays were offered. Every sentence landed heavily, because every sentence was true. David wasn't exposing secrets. He was describing reality, the years of distance, the excuses, the choices, the missed opportunities. The attorney continued reading. When cancer entered my life, I hoped old wounds might heal. I hoped my illness would remind us that family matters more than pride. The next sentence seemed to hit his parents particularly hard. It did not. Neither of them looked up. Neither objected. Neither attempted to defend themselves, because there was nothing to dispute. Truth has a way of stripping away arguments. The attorney reached another section. If my children ever read this, I want them to understand something important. People reveal their character through actions, not words. I thought about Emily, Jacob, Noah. One day they would be old enough to fully understand everything that happened. I wondered what lessons they would carry from it. Hopefully not bitterness. Hopefully not resentment. David certainly wasn't leaving them that legacy. The letter continued. I do not hate my parents. I never have. But love does not require pretending that harmful choices never happened. That sentence stayed with me. Love does not require pretending. How many families spend decades pretending? Pretending everything is fine. Pretending hurt never occurred. Pretending consequences shouldn't exist. David had chosen honesty instead. Not cruelty. Honesty. The attorney finally reached the last page. By then, even he seemed emotionally affected. His voice softened slightly. My greatest regret is not that I am dying. My greatest regret is leaving Sarah and the children behind. But I trust them. They are stronger than they know. I felt tears slide down my face. The grief was still there. It would probably always be there. But for the first time since his death, I felt something else. Pride. David had lived exactly as he believed. And now he was leaving behind the same example. The attorney finished the final paragraph. Then he closed the folder. The room remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody knew what to say. Eventually, my father-in-law cleared his throat. The sound was weak. Nothing like the confident man who had entered the room earlier. I think we're done here. The attorney looked at him. Not entirely. My father-in-law frowned. What does that mean? The attorney folded his hands. There are copies of the letter available. The significance became obvious immediately. This wasn't a private note hidden away forever. David intended the truth to survive. Not through gossip. Not through rumors. Through documented facts. My father-in-law understood it too. His shoulders sagged. For the first time he looked old. Not powerful. Not intimidating. Just old. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Everyone signed documents. Copies were distributed. Formalities were completed. Then we walked out. I expected my in-laws to leave immediately. Instead, my mother-in-law approached me near the elevator. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. She didn't. She simply stared at me. You think you've won? The word surprised me. Won. I wasn't fighting a competition. My husband was dead. There were no winners. I looked at her quietly. No. Her eyes hardened. Then she turned and walked away. The elevator doors closed behind her. That was the last time I saw either of them for several months. Life moved forward. Slowly. Painfully. But it moved. The estate provided stability. Not luxury. Stability. We purchased a modest home near the military base where I was stationed. The children returned to school. Counseling helped. Time helped. Routine helped. Nothing erased the grief. But grief became something we carried rather than something that crushed us. Meanwhile, word about the will began spreading. Not because I talked. I didn't. Not because the attorney talked. He certainly didn't. The truth spread because people asked questions. Especially in small communities. Family friends learned pieces of the story. Then more pieces. Eventually, the broader picture emerged. People discovered how little involvement David's parents had maintained during his illness. How rarely they visited. How little support they offered. How they turned away their own grandchildren. Nobody needed me to tell the story. The facts told themselves. And facts are remarkably stubborn things. By autumn, I began hearing updates from mutual acquaintances. Former friends were distancing themselves from my in-laws. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Just quietly. Invitations became less frequent. Conversations became more awkward. The image they had spent years building no longer matched reality. Again, I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't making phone calls. I wasn't posting online. I wasn't attacking anyone. Truth was doing all the work. Yet, despite everything, something unexpected happened. The children still missed them. Not constantly. Not every day. But often enough. Especially Noah. One evening, he looked up from the dinner table. Do Grandma and Grandpa hate us? The question nearly broke me. No, sweetheart. Then why didn't they let us stay? I had no answer that an 8-year-old could understand. Because the truth was complicated. Adults often hurt people for reasons children can't comprehend. Pride. Resentment. Ego. Old grudges. None of those explanations make sense to a child. Honestly, they don't make much sense to adults either. That night after the kids were asleep, I sat alone on the porch. The air was cool. Leaves drifted across the yard. For the first time, I asked myself a difficult question. What if justice wasn't enough? What if consequences alone couldn't heal what had been broken? I didn't know the answer. But several weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address made my heart stop. It was from my father-in-law. And for the first time since he closed that door, he had something to say. I stared at the envelope for nearly 10 minutes before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it away. Part of me wanted to return it unopened. After everything that had happened, I wasn't interested in hearing excuses. But another part of me, the part that David had always encouraged, believed people should at least be given the opportunity to tell the truth. Eventually, I opened it. The letter was handwritten. That alone surprised me. My father-in-law had spent most of his life dictating emails, sending formal messages, or letting other people handle communication. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen anything written in his own hand. The writing was uneven. Not the confident handwriting of a businessman. more like the handwriting of a man struggling to say something difficult. Sarah, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you should. But there are things I need to say before it's too late. I continued reading. For several pages he described the months following David's death. The funeral, the reading of the will, the letter, the reactions from friends and family, the isolation, the embarrassment, the regret. What struck me most was what the letter did not contain. There were no excuses, no attempts to blame me, no attempts to blame David, no attempts to justify closing the door. Just regret, deep regret. Near the end, he wrote something that caught my attention. I always believed I was protecting my family. Now I realize I spent years protecting my pride. I read that sentence 3 times, then a 4th. Because it felt honest. Painfully honest. A week later, another letter arrived. Then another. None of them asked for money. None of them challenged the will. None of them demanded forgiveness. Instead, they focused on one thing: accountability. My father-in-law described mistakes he now saw clearly. Moments he wished he could relive. Conversations he wished he had handled differently. Years he wished he could get back. Eventually, he revealed something else. My mother-in-law had experienced a serious health scare. Nothing life-threatening according to the letter, but serious enough to force both of them to confront reality. Aging has a way of doing that. At some point, every person realizes there may not be unlimited opportunities left. The future becomes smaller. Regrets become larger. One evening after reading another letter, I found myself sitting quietly at the kitchen table. Emily noticed. "What are you thinking about?" I handed her the latest letter. She read several pages, then set it down. "Do you believe him?" It was a fair question. "I don't know." She nodded slowly. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she surprised me. "People can change." I looked at her. "Do you think they have?" She shrugged. "I think they're trying." The answer carried more wisdom than many adults possess. Trying isn't the same as succeeding, but it matters. Several weeks later, my father-in-law requested a meeting. Not at his house. Not at ours. A neutral location. A small family restaurant halfway between our towns. I hesitated for days. Part of me wanted to decline. The children had already suffered enough. Why reopen old wounds? Then I remembered something David used to say. The truth can survive difficult conversations. Eventually, I agreed. The meeting took place on a rainy Saturday afternoon. The restaurant was quiet. Mostly older couples enjoying late lunches. Nothing dramatic. Nothing confrontational. Just 4 generations of hurt sitting around a table. When my in-laws entered, I barely recognized them. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence was gone. The entitlement was gone. They looked tired. Older. Smaller somehow. My mother-in-law's eyes filled with tears almost immediately when she saw the children. Especially Noah. He had grown several inches since the last time she saw him. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had missed months of his life because of choices she made herself. For several minutes, nobody knew what to say. Finally, my father-in-law spoke. "I owe all of you an apology." The words sounded awkward, unpracticed, which made them feel genuine. He turned toward the children. "I hurt you." Emily remained silent. Jacob looked down at the table. Noah stared at his glass of lemonade. My father-in-law continued. "There is no excuse for what I did." The simplicity of the statement carried weight. Many people apologize by explaining. Explaining often becomes defending. This was different. Then something happened that I will never forget. Jacob spoke. "My quiet 12-year-old son. The child who rarely discussed emotions. When Dad died, I thought everything was going to be okay because we still had family. The restaurant suddenly felt very quiet." Jacob swallowed, then continued. "When you closed the door, I stopped believing that." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The honesty in his voice was devastating. My mother-in-law began crying openly. Not politely. Not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from genuine pain. Years of pride couldn't protect her from hearing that. My father-in-law looked shattered. The children continued sharing their experiences. Not angrily. Just honestly. How scared they had been. How confused they felt. How much the rejection hurt. How long it stayed with them. Listening to them was difficult, but necessary. Because healing requires truth. Eventually, my father-in-law wiped his eyes. Then he said something I don't think he ever imagined saying. "The day I closed that door was the greatest shame of my life." No one responded immediately. The statement hung in the air. Heavy. Real. Undeniable. For years he had been the man who always had answers. The man who always believed he was right. Now he was simply a grandfather admitting failure. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the end, nobody had solved everything. Nobody had erased the past. Life doesn't work that way. But something important had changed. The walls were beginning to crack. Not because anyone demanded it, because honesty finally entered the room. As we prepared to leave, my father-in-law stood. His hands trembled slightly. Age. Emotion. Perhaps both. He looked directly at me, then at the children. "We don't deserve another chance." He paused. "But if there's any way to earn one, we'd like to try." The request wasn't dramatic. It wasn't manipulative. It wasn't wrapped in guilt. Just a simple request from two people who finally understood what they had lost. I looked at my children, then at the grandparents who had hurt them. The answer wasn't obvious. Trust takes years to build, seconds to destroy, and a very long time to rebuild. Still, for the first time, I believed rebuilding might actually be possible. I didn't answer their request that day. Not because I wanted to punish them. Not because I wanted them to suffer. I simply knew that trust couldn't be restored with a single conversation. The children deserved better than promises. They deserved proof. Real proof. Consistent proof. The kind that only time can provide. So I told them exactly that. If we're going to move forward, it has to happen slowly. My father-in-law nodded immediately. "We understand." "No expectations," I continued. "No pressure on the kids." Again, he nodded. My mother-in-law wiped her eyes. "We'll accept whatever you're willing to give." That was the beginning. Not a dramatic reconciliation. Not a movie ending. Just a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are enough. Over the next several months, they started showing up. Not to make speeches. Not to explain themselves. Just to be present. They attended Noah's Little League games. They sat quietly in the bleachers and cheered when he got a hit. They came to Jacob's school band concert. They brought Emily flowers after a debate competition she had worked hard for. Little things. Ordinary things. The kinds of things grandparents are supposed to do. At first, the children remained cautious, especially Jacob. I couldn't blame him. He remembered that closed door more vividly than anyone. But children also possess an extraordinary ability that many adults lose. They remain open to change when change proves itself. Slowly, the distance began shrinking. One event at a time. One conversation at a time. One act of consistency at a time. Meanwhile, I continued rebuilding our life. The army eventually became less of a refuge and more of a normal routine again. The children settled into school. The new house started feeling like home. Pictures returned to the walls. Laughter returned to the dinner table. Grief never disappeared. It simply changed shape. Instead of feeling like a storm that overwhelmed everything, it became a quiet companion, always present, but no longer controlling every moment. Sometimes I still caught myself reaching for my phone to call David. Sometimes I still turned toward his side of the bed. Those habits linger. Anyone who has lost a spouse understands that. Love doesn't vanish because someone dies. It continues, just differently. About a year after the reading of the will, my father-in-law called. His voice sounded nervous. "There's something we'd like to ask." "What is it?" "We were hoping the family might visit David." I knew exactly what he meant. The cemetery. His grave. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said yes. A week later, we gathered there together. The morning was cool and clear. The cemetery sat on a gentle hill outside town. Rows of flags moved softly in the breeze. Birds sang somewhere among the trees. It was peaceful. David would have liked that. The children carried small bouquets. Emily brought white roses. Jacob brought blue carnations. Noah chose bright yellow flowers because they had been his father's favorite color. We stood quietly around the grave. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Some moments deserve silence. This was one of them. Eventually, Noah knelt and placed his flowers beside the headstone. "Hi, Dad." 3 simple words. Enough to break every heart standing there. My mother-in-law began crying. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Not because everything was forgotten. Because compassion and accountability can exist at the same time. That was one of the lessons I had learned through all of this. After several minutes, my father-in-law stepped forward. He stared at his son's name carved into the stone. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. "I spent most of my life thinking success was about money." He swallowed hard. "Then I almost lost my grandchildren." No one interrupted. He continued. "I lost my son long before he died. I just didn't realize it." The honesty in those words struck all of us. For years, he had measured life through achievement. Through business. Through status. Through control. Now he understood what truly mattered. Family. Time. Relationships. The things money can never buy back once they're gone. He looked toward the children. Then toward me. Finally, he looked at David's headstone. Your last lesson saved me. Tears filled his eyes. It came later than it should have, but it saved me. I thought about that for a long time afterward, because perhaps that was David's final gift. Not the inheritance, not the investments, not even the carefully prepared documents. The real gift was truth. Truth forced everyone to confront reality. Truth exposed selfishness. Truth created consequences, and ultimately truth created the possibility of healing. Without truth, reconciliation would have been meaningless. It would have been pretending. David never wanted pretending. He wanted honesty. As the months passed, our family continued moving forward. Not perfectly. No family is perfect. There were awkward moments, painful memories, occasional setbacks. But there was also growth. There was effort. There was love. And perhaps most importantly, there was accountability. The closed door that once symbolized rejection slowly became something else. A reminder. A reminder that pride can destroy relationships faster than poverty ever could. A reminder that family should never be taken for granted. A reminder that forgiveness does not erase consequences. It simply allows people to build something better after facing them. Today, when I think about that terrible afternoon on my in-laws' porch, I no longer feel the anger I once felt. The pain remains, but the anger is gone. Because the story didn't end with a closed door. It ended with people finding the courage to open another one. The door to humility, the door to accountability, the door to healing. And sometimes those are the hardest doors of all. If you've stayed with me through this story, I hope it leaves you with one simple thought. Never assume there will always be more time. More time to apologize. More time to call. More time to repair a relationship. More time to tell someone you love them. Life has a way of reminding us that tomorrow is never guaranteed. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the people who matter most in your life. And if you're fortunate enough to still have them, don't wait for a tragedy to bring you closer. Thank you for listening, for sharing this journey, and for spending your time with our family story.